My name is Myra Hale. I am 31 years old and I live in Rivenwood, Oregon, a quiet town with pine smells and a bakery that makes the same sweet loaf every weekend. And I work in a small bookstore that smells like old paper and coffee. And I am in a relationship with a woman who I believed would stay by my side through thick and thin. And I am proud of the small life I have built here. A life that feels steady and safe. And I have a habit of listening more than speaking, of keeping a calm face even when storms are close. And for a long time, that is how I moved through days, until one morning, I found something that shattered that calm. Something that did not seem real at first, but then burned through my confidence like a hot iron. Because I learned that my girlfriend had betrayed me. She had taken her affection to someone at work who I trusted as a colleague, a coworker who I thought would never cross that line. And the moment hit me with a force I cannot fully describe. A punch that came from the side and knocked the ground away. And at that moment, I understood that my life as I knew it had changed forever, and I could feel the first ache of a life I did not want. A life where the person I cared for most was not loyal. A life where the memory of our shared plans began to feel like a weight on my chest. A life where the room that had once held our laughter now seemed to hold only echoes. And I stood there in my small apartment in Rivenwood and felt a cold fear creep inside me. And I knew that I must decide what to do next. And the question I kept asking myself was this: could I forgive or would I have to walk away? And I was not sure, and the hours stretched on in a slow, cruel way. And I knew that this was the moment that would reveal who I am. Because sometimes the true test of a person is not when life is easy, but when life becomes a mess, and you still choose to act with integrity. And I wanted to choose right, but I was not sure what that even meant. So Act 1 began with me standing in that doorway of the apartment that had seen our late-night talks and our quiet Sundays and our whispered plans. And the world I knew unglued itself in a single glance at a text message on the screen. A simple line that said something like, "Please talk." Nothing that looked like an apology. Nothing that sounded like we could fix this. And the fear that rose in my throat did not come from anger alone. It came from the fear of being alone in a town that would not forgive me if I screamed. And I realized that the first problem I had to solve was how to protect my heart while I faced the shock of being betrayed. How to walk away without burning the bridges I still might need. How to keep a sense of self when the person who held part of that self had chosen to share their life with someone else. And I also recognized that my nemesis was not only the idea of the betrayal, but the way it forced me to see a future that might never be the same. The coworker who had smiled at me at the bakery counter, and who always offered a quick compliment when the shifts got tense, now appeared as the threat. The man who would pretend to be a friend, and who had become a symbol of the way life can twist one of your most trusted corners. And so I began that first act with a choice. A choice to tell the truth to myself, and to the people I cared about, and to decide how to move forward. And with that, the day came when I did not sleep in the place I shared with her anymore. I packed my things while the morning light spilled through the blinds, and I walked away with only a bag and a plan to put a barrier between the pain and my heart. And I did not leave a note for her, because I wanted to deny her the comfort of a goodbye that would pretend nothing happened. And I stepped into the apartment of a friend who offered a couch and a listening ear, and I felt a strange relief to be away from the place that had become a memory of betrayal. But even then, I found that the first step toward healing is not a triumph, but a kind of quiet endurance. And I began to tell myself that I would not let this break me. I would choose to learn from it and move toward something I could call my own again. And that first night, I asked myself what I would do with the future. And the answer arrived slowly, as if through fog. You will begin anew, you will build a life you can trust again. You will, in time, find what you deserve. Plus, you will learn to trust again, but not blindly. And I took those words and tucked them into my heart as I closed the door on the old life with a final, solemn breath. And then the second part of Act 1, I must tell you what happened at work. For the world did not end in the quiet apartment. It turned up in a hallway where I walked to my desk to sign onto a system that would show me the days ahead. And there, I heard the voice of the coworker who had become the symbol of everything wrong, pulling a chair toward a small table as if he believed there would be a simple apology offered. But there would be none. And I could not tell if he wanted to admit his fault or just to feel the sting of not having me bend to his plan. And he spoke with a calm that felt rehearsed, saying that he did not plan to apologize because he liked my girlfriend, and that sentence hit me with a raw force. A message that said I did not matter as much as his satisfaction. And at that moment, I had to hold my breath to avoid the impulse to lash out, to punch him in the face, or to throw a chair through a window. And I kept my voice steady, and I told him that he could have her, that I would not fight over someone who would throw away a vow to be honest, that I would speak to the Human Resources Department to document what happened, and I watched his face as the color drained from it, and I saw his certainty crack into a lie like a glass pane, and I realized that there was no good outcome for me there in that moment except to choose a path that would keep me intact. And then, as if that moment was a turning point, management moved him away from my floor, away from my team, away from the circle of people that used to be our daily life. And the company promised not to let us work on the same projects again. And while it felt like a small victory to have that decision made, it still did not fill the empty space inside me. And I began to recover by finding a new place to live, a small studio where I would lay down my own floorboards and paint the walls with colors that felt like the sunrise over a hillside. And I signed the lease and felt that tiny spark of independence. A spark that reminded me I could still make a life on my own terms, and I set new routines. I rolled up my sleeves and found a rhythm in the morning light. I got up early. I walked to the corner cafe and bought myself coffee and a pastry. I listened to the old radio that crackled with country songs, and I tucked away the hurt in a drawer of my mind where I would keep it but not let it spill all over my days. And I did not seek romance or flirtation, yet because I wanted to be careful. I wanted to know who I was again before I opened the door to someone else, and Act 1 ends with me standing under a new skylight in the studio, holding a paintbrush in my hand, and looking at a wall that will soon hold a color I choose for my own life. Which brings me to the next act, where I would try to fix this broken part of my life in ways that would test my heart and my nerve. And I discovered during those weeks that healing does not come in a straight line, but in small, stubborn shifts. And I learned that there would be moments when I felt the old ache creep back, and I would have to tell myself to breathe and to keep moving. And in those days, I found a simple truth that would become my anchor, which is that I am not what they did to me. I am what I decide to become, and I carried that truth with me into Act 2, where I tried to solve the problem by returning to the world I shared with others, and then by stepping away from it when those steps felt too easy or too painful. And in the first attempt to solve the problem, I went back to work with a cautious smile, and I kept my head held high as I faced colleagues who spoke in softer tones around the subject. And I tried to do my job as if the betrayal had happened to someone else, and sometimes it worked and other times it did not. And I found that the more I tried to fit back into the old patterns, the more the memory of what had happened would slip its fingers under the sleeves of my shirt and pull at the fabric of my courage. And the more I saw how the old life could tempt me to pretend that nothing changed, the more I realized that a life without corrosion in it was a life that would require new boundaries. And so I set small tests for myself. I created reminders to protect my heart. I slowed down when I spoke. I asked for help when the load grew too heavy, and I watched for the moments when I would be drawn to the familiar routine, and I decided to change the rhythm to one that did not invite a return to the old way. And there were moments of small victories as I could walk through the office halls and not feel the ache of the past. And there were moments of sharp pain when I overheard their names in the hum of the break room. And I would take a long breath and tell myself that I would not let this story be told with me as the victim. I would tell it on my own terms. And then came the moment when the problem grew in a different way. When I found myself in a low place after a week of rumors and a few awkward run-ins. When the coworker who betrayed me resurfaced in a conversation that reminded me of the old life, and the image of his smug face as he admitted he liked her began to haunt me. And I felt the old impulse to lash out growing again, and I believed for a moment that I might lose the careful control I had built since leaving the old apartment, and I questioned whether I could ever trust again. And in that moment, I told myself that the only way to regain trust would be to be honest with my own heart, not to seek revenge as a quick fix, but to seek a truth that would come from the actions I chose. And that moment when I was certain that I could not fix this by force or by simply ignoring it became the deepest low I would endure. A place where the ache felt heavy, and the days seemed too long and my heart felt too small. And yet from that depth, I found the strongest resolve I had ever carried. A decision that my final attempt to solve this problem would be to turn the frame of this story around, not toward destruction, but toward a careful, controlled act that would end the danger without tearing down what I still deserved. and I began to imagine a final plan that would be both honest and brave. And I knew that I would need to choose carefully how I would tell the truth, how I would expose the facts while protecting real people who could be harmed by careless words. And I would decide that I would not broadcast the flames of this room to the town, but I would reveal the truth in a way that would give others a chance to learn and to heal. And I would do it without cruelty. And the time came for the final attempt to solve the problem, and I prepared for a confrontation that would force a clear end to the old life. And I did not seek revenge through reckless action, but through the disciplined act of speaking truth with respect for myself, and for those who did not deserve to be dragged into the mess. And I stood in the space between the old life and the new, with the final chance to set a boundary that could not be crossed. And I chose to meet them in a quiet place at the edge of town, where the light from the setting sun turned the windows into gold. And I told them that I knew what had happened, that I would not pretend I did not, and that they deserved an opportunity to answer for their choices without me becoming the weapon that would ruin their lives. And I asked for nothing from them except honesty for myself, and I asked for accountability and for the chance to keep the pieces of my own life intact, and the partner looked away. And the coworker tried to defend his actions with rehearsed lines that sounded hollow. And the words that came from my mouth felt heavier than any iron tool I had ever lifted. And I heard myself say that I wanted to leave this behind and build a new life with boundaries that would protect me. And in that moment, I realized the truth that the end of the old life did not have to be a destruction of all we had together, but a refusal to rebuild it on the wrong ground. And the consequences of that choice were not the fire of a courtroom or a loud social blast, but a quiet, slow dissolution of the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. For the partner chose to stay in the old cycle, the coworker was moved to another team, the fixed rules kept us apart, and the office began to feel like a place I could still walk through without the sting of memory following me. And the town of Rivenwood began to feel a little larger in a good way, as I realized that I had survived something that could have broken me, and I learned that the most important victory was not to ruin their lives, but to choose a path that would let me keep my own life intact. And with that final act, I stepped into a renewed life. A life with new friends and new routines, a life that did not pretend the hurt did not happen but faced it with a kind of stubborn grace. And I began to see a different future for myself, perhaps one where love could come again, but only after I had learned how to love myself first. And the town gave me a quiet applause in the form of ordinary moments, like the bus that came on time, the neighbor who smiled when I passed, the sunrise that painted the hills gold, and I found a new normal where I no longer expected apologies from others to define my worth. I found a new normal where my art and my work became a sanctuary. And I found a new normal where I could go to bed at night and not relive the hurt, but instead lay down with the memory of having taken a step toward healing. And the twist in my story came when I realized that the truth itself could be a kind of revenge that does not seek to break others, but to set me free. And I understood that the person who had betrayed me would carry a heavier burden of their own choices, and that I would not be the one to carry that load forever. And so the final image I carry is of me standing in the studio with a new color on the wall, and a sense that I am not alone, and a sense that the town of Rivenwood did not end when I learned of the betrayal but began anew. And so I tell this story now not to paint myself as a hero, but to show that a life can survive a great betrayal and still choose to build something better. And if you are listening to this, and your heart is breaking as you hear these words, I want you to know that you also can endure this, and you can find a way back to the person you were meant to be. You can trust again, but only in time and only with honesty and kindness. And you can forgive yourself for what you did not deserve to feel, and you can make a life worth living. And that is my new normal, and that is the end of this tale. A long road that began with a broken heart in a small house in Rivenwood, Oregon, and ends with a studio light warm on the walls and a heart that knows it will be all right.